In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this loaf of bread with the trub left over from my Pinter. Now, you could probably use any kind of trub left over from brewing beer to make a loaf of bread. You might just need to top it up with a bit of extra water, depending on how much you have. So what I've done is I've poured all of the fluid out from the brewing dock into a bowl. And because there was still some sediment and yeast left in the bottom, I've just topped that up with a little bit of water, given it a swirl around, and then poured that back into the bowl with the rest of the fluid. And this is the trub that I poured out of the brewing dock. You can even see some of the sediment and yeast has started to separate from the beer in the few seconds it's been sitting there. And don't forget to give that brewing dock a really good clean out now before it all dries up. And here's what I used for the bread. 3 ingredients, that's it. So 7 grams salt, 350 milliliters of the trub fluid, and 500 grams of very strong bread flour. So to get started, I mixed all of that trub together. Then I add the 7 grams of salt, 350 milliliters of the trub, and the 500 grams of the bread flour. Next, I combine all these ingredients in my stand mixer. This could definitely be done in a bowl with the back of a spoon. It's really just to combine them. I'm not actually kneading it at this point. Then I just let the dough rest for about 15 minutes. This is actually a really important step in the process. If you don't do this, then the dough is going to be really wet and sticky and quite hard to work with if you're going to be kneading it by hand. After this, I turn the stand mixer on and let it knead for about 5 minutes. You can totally do this by hand. I find the slap and fold method works very well, but stand mixer is definitely easier. After the 5 minutes, you'll see the dough come together, become smoother on the outside and a lot easier to handle. I then take the dough out of the bowl and put it on my work surface, folding it together a few times and then giving it a few slap and folds just to bring the dough together into a nice uniform ball shape. And here's that slap and fold method I spoke about earlier. You could use this to knead the dough if you don't have a stand mixer. At this point, the dough might be quite sticky, so I find using wet hands a lot easier to work with the dough on the surface rather than flour. Now I lightly wet the dough and put it back in the bowl ready for proving. I cover with the damp cloth and leave to prove for about 1 hour. Thankfully, my trub was active enough, and as you can see, the dough has risen. I take the dough out of the bowl and place it onto the work surface, again with wetted hands to stop it from sticking to me and the surface. Although this time I probably could have done with a little bit more water on the work surface, as you can see the dough is sticking a little bit. I now fold the dough and roll it into a ball, giving it a bit more structure, ready to prove again for another 2 hours. Now it's time for the final proving, so this time we use a bit of flour and I just lightly flour the banneton. I'm using rice flour. I find it works a bit better than just plain flour. I lightly flour the top of the dough and the work surface. Then I scrape the dough out, ready for the final shaping. Then I'm just folding both sides of the dough over onto itself, then rolling it up like a sausage just to give some good tension inside the dough. Is this the right thing to do? I don't know, but it works for me and it's quite easy. Then I roll the dough over and place it in the banneton bottom side up. At this point I start pinching the underneath of the dough. I think this is called stitching. I saw it somewhere and it's supposed to give a bit more tension to the dough during the final bake. Lightly flour the dough so it doesn't stick when you drop it out later, ready for baking. Then I grab a plastic bag and pop the dough inside, folding it back on itself just to keep it roughly airtight. This then went in my fridge for another about 4 hours. 4 hours later and it's time to bake, so I preheat the oven to a gas mark 8, roughly 230 Celsius, pop in the Dutch oven and let that warm up for about 25 minutes. So the dough's out the fridge, and I just tip that out onto a bit of baking parchment. This is to make it really easy to get into the Dutch oven. And now it's time to score the loaf. I used to use a knife, but a razor works way better. Just save yourself some time and buy one. You will not be disappointed. So dough goes in the Dutch oven, use the parchment, makes it a lot easier. Lid goes on, and in the oven. And this will be baked for about 25 minutes. After that time, take the bread out of the oven and take the lid off. Then this will go back in the oven for about 30 minutes, but this time on a lower temperature, roughly 190 Celsius. After this, I took the bread out of the oven, had a look at it. I tapped on the bottom to make sure that it was all cooked. It was pretty much there, but it was still a little bit pale, so I just put it back in the oven on its own for 5 more minutes. And here it is, the final loaf, leavened with the trub from brewing dark matter in my Pinter. And now I will leave you with some footage of me cutting into the loaf.